we're finally going to understand absolutely everything. The other good news I have for you is if you aren't paying attention while I say it, you already knew it all. Everything I'm going to say is already in your heads. You're just going to be recognizing this understanding as it appears. The other good news I have for you is that I said the scary, scary word Palestine yesterday. I'm not here, this is right now in this sentence is going to be the last time you hear the words, genocide or Gaza or Hamas. I don't care about those debating those terms or the actual, the literal linguistic disaster we're entrenched in on social media. I want to just build to a place where I think a view opens into something that we're all experiencing, whether we want to or not, which is just a kind of reality that doesn't have a good name. But fortunately, our hero has given it one. So the full title of this talk, it's not all written out, but the title at the moment has a title and a subtitle. Multiple Worlds Vying to Exist, Philip K. Dick in Palestine. And then the long subtitle is A Journey by Way of Etienne Soriat's The Different Modes of Existence, David Lafourjade's Worlds Built to Fall Apart, and Cyril Kornbluth's The Marching Morons. You weren't expecting that last one. So, and obviously I'm going to be semi-reading and semi-extemporizing all my way through this, okay? It's a situation I relish. I actually like giving this kind of talk, working up to the last second and then having like notes that are almost a readable essay, but knowing that it would be better to just extemporize a lot of major portions of it. Anyway, it's like a Van Vogt style essay. It's going to change direction every 800 words. Okay, so
deep cut jokes, I like it.
In the interest of transparency, I'll say that I'm motivated partly by the project of salvaging Philip K. Dick for contemporary leftism, 21st century leftism, at a time when other kinds of thoughts might make him start to seem like a classic 20th century problematic white male. And I know that some of you have already thought, oh gee, I wouldn't want to hear what he would say about like today's world. Like, if any of you have read the Naomi Klein book, honestly, how old would he be now? 80 something, 90 something?
90 something.
90 something Philip K. Dick would probably, unfortunately, be very susceptible to a kind of diagonalism, and he might be coming up with all kinds of stuff that we're like, stop, we used to love you, So this isn't about like guessing what he would say about today. This is about his work as a lens and as a venue for kinds of meaning that we all obviously cherish or we wouldn't be. In that sense, I'm also going to be sort of excluding biographical notions from the talk. It's just, for the moment, I don't care. And what I'm really doing is reconnecting with Philip K. Dick as a social novelist, that thing I mentioned yesterday in the podcast, the Balzac and Dickens side of him, which, of course, he's not like Dickens or Balzac. He's a very special kind of social novelist. But this is the Philip K. Dick who was celebrated in Kim Stanley Robinson's thesis, and who Frederick Jameson cherishes, right? The one who gives us access to a potential political intervention into reality that's incredibly elusive and special. And, in that sense, I guess I'm like kind of offering myself up as maybe, if there's the four Marxists, the four wise men, the four scary Marxists that came to visit him. Maybe I'm the fifth Marxist today. Okay. So we're going to go visit the world of hardcore, not only hardcore, but super obscure French philosophy for a moment. We're going to start there. He's not an obvious person for anyone to be reading anymore, because even French philosophers forgot about this guy. He was in the 20th century. He was a tweedy, boring guy who taught a lot of hip people like Bruno Latour, and he was a professor at the Sorbonne, and his own writing went mostly ignored until very, very recently, where this guy Lafourjade, who's written what I think is the best new study of Dick's writing that I've read since Alberto Rossi, at least, like a really essential one. And now that is not to say, it's not to assess books I haven't read. There are lots of studies of Philip K. Dick that come along that I don't get to. But this one blew me away. But he uses Sorial, this mostly forgotten French philosopher, as his toolkit for talking about Philip K. Dick. So I'm going to have to give you some Sorial. The good news is he's weirdly beautiful, and he's a kind of secret twin for PKD. His basic ideas are closer, I think, to Dick's worldview than any other single philosopher I've ever run across. I mean, and that includes the ones that Dick personally identified with, that we've enumerated, and that he mentions a lot, or even if sometimes we think he only knows the Encyclopedia Britannica version of them, and others that we might apply and say, oh, maybe Dick is really, Baudrillard. Maybe that's who Philip K. Dick is. I think Dick is Sorial, and I'm going to try to give evidence of that by actually reading a few sequences from Sorial to you to begin. It's kind of like, remember that website, Which Philip K. Dick Story Are We In Today? It's like, which philosopher is Philip K. Dick today? Today he's Sorial. I guess that also relates to like, where will the little man? It's like the same game. So let me first paraphrase Sorial. There's a really useful paraphrase of Sorial, weirdly not written by Lapougeat, but by Lapougeat's translator in the preface to this book. And I'm going to read that. Sorial's philosophy aims to shift the emphasis from a single pre-existing reality within which everything that exists would be found, to an interrogation into the various ways in which different types of existence do in fact exist. Whoops, what does that say? And exist as distinct manners of existing. Now that's a fucked up sentence. But let's do it again. Sorial's philosophy aims to shift the emphasis from a single pre-existing reality within which everything that exists would be found, to an interrogation into the various ways of existing in which different types of existence do in fact exist and exist as distinct manners of existing. Okay, the whole latter part of that's just crazy. So we'll just say different ways of existing. Let's go on from there. For Sorial, a stone exists, a person exists, and a tree exists. But a forest exists in a manner all its own, separate from individual trees. Likewise, a fictional character like Don Quixote, the idea of a nation, and an unmade film to which an already written screenplay refers, all have their distinct modes of existence. And it's this last one. That's a weird thing to put on a list, like stone, tree, person. Okay, yeah, they all exist in different ways. We've kind of gone down that path, but to focus, and this is not a guy who's probably that into film. He's a very traditional tweety guy, but this interest in specifying the screenplay to an unmade film has a manner of existing. Or no, the film to which an unfilmed script exists. That film exists in a sense too. Now this is where the meat is on the bone here, okay? Sorial is extremely interested in things that barely exist, that are rival claimants to existence, but that they really need a ton of help. They're not doing a good job so far, or they're like, not everyone even agrees that they exist. Okay, Sorial is enumerating ways that things can exist, because there is no one way to exist, and existence isn't fixed. And he says, the thing that we got to notice is there's a lot of potential, barely existing things. I'm going to go back to the quote. Particularly important within Sorial's analysis of these different modes are virtual existences, which is to say incomplete existences, or existences in the making. Now, that's such a Philip K. Dick phrase, existences in the making. And this idea of making is really, really important here. Existences in the making that seem to call, there's Heidegger, I think, that these existences in the making, they seem to call for an intensification and a development of their own reality. These are existences that make a claim on their own future development. Sorial pushes away from the traditional primacy of the already fully constituted, that thing that most people will say, like, come on, reality, look around you, here it is, we all know what it is. He pushes away from the traditional primacy to show a picture in which the world remains something in the making. A space in which existences can exist with a greater or lesser reality and must affirm their own right to exist. Now, I think that's probably pretty recognizable. It sounds pretty filthy, right? The next thing that he focuses on, Soriao is obsessed with what he calls instauration. It's an untranslatable French word, instauration, to instaurate. What is it? Well, basically it translates to, get ready, here's Phil, repair. Restoration and repair. But what's cool about the instauration in Soriao's concept, and I think the word somehow catches this just by my ear, I hear it, is that it's by repairing things you also make them exist to begin with. It's a combination of instilling and restoring, right? It's the cosmic, it's the pot healer. Things don't exist until you love them and instill and restore them all at once. That's how reality happens. And it's unstable. It's fundamentally always opposed by indifference, rival realities, other possibilities. So for something to be instaurated is not a one-time thing like, there, I did it. Cool, we're done. I instaurated that. Now it's just permanently great and real and it's in reality. No way. It's like clapping to keep Tinkerbell alive. Instauration is what we do all the time, and we must continuously make the world for there to be anything that we can claim as reality. And therefore, by definition, it's subjective and various. It's absolutely an overwhelming amount of rival realities that different people are instaurating, as hard as they can. Multiple worlds vying to exist. This is what we walk around pretending is just reality. Constant, unstable cluster of infinite numbers of variably instaurated possible worlds. Here's Soriao's actual words. I'm going to read to you from the guy himself now a little bit. Why instauration? He's very formal and funny, but he's beautiful too. It refers to the instance in which, through our personal energy, we take responsibility for the becoming, the coming into existence, for the establishment of something as concrete and full as possible. There's that back door of as possible, which is him saying nothing is complete. And then he adds this further disclaimer with this gorgeous sentence. Usually, this is plagued by a kind of haunting, that of the work to be done, which is itself another fundamental presence. In other words, every reality is ghosted by the sense that it might fall apart at any moment, that it's only being instaurated as we speak, and there's probably more work to be done if it's even going to be there tomorrow. Okay? Now, I'm going to move on. You know what? I'm going to read a little more from La Plage because it's so good. So first of all, in his primary essay, this is gonna fuck with you. He begins with one of his big pushes into explaining what he means. Here's the metaphor he chooses. A lump of clay on the sculptor's bench. An existence, undeniable, total, accomplished. He's being sarcastic. But nothing yet exists of the aesthetic being which still has to bloom. Each application of the hands and thumbs, each action of the chisel accomplishes the work. Do not look at the chisel, look at the statue. With each new action of the demiurge, and use that word, the statue gradually emerges from its limbo. It moves toward existence. This is like Soriao in a nutshell. It moves toward existence. Something might happen. We might get a world here. Toward an existence which in the end will burst forth in an intense and accomplished actual presence. It is only insofar as this heap of earth is consecrated to being this work, that it is a statue. Okay, check that description out. It is only in the sense that the statue is work to be done that it's a statue. It's instauration, it's making the loving effort of the application of our attention to make it into a world is all of the reality it's ever going to get. Existing only weakly at first, though its distant relation with the final object that gives it its soul, the statue gradually frees itself, takes shape, exists. The sculptor, who at first only senses it, accomplishes it little by little. With each determination he gives to the clay. When will it be finished? Okay, I'm going to stop there, but obviously, beautiful resonance with the Dickian metaphor, pleasure of the pot that is the one at the end of Flow My Tears, right? It's just instaurated by love and attention when everything else has fallen away. It's still alive. It's still a world. Okay, so the big turn in La Pujade, and this is where I'm going to quote the incredibly useful translator again. La Pujade pushes Soriau's analysis into a political dimension, turning his attention to those existences that find themselves dispossessed of their reality. That is to say, those beings that find themselves to have less reality than others who control what has been determined as most real. If existences need to make a claim on their own reality and their own right to exist, what happens when an existence is prevented from doing so by forces within its world and is therefore stripped and dispossessed of the very reality which makes it claim? Well, thank goodness I had you guys for the last 24 hours to make me feel the degree to which this is almost the whole of the nut. And I'm going to really come back and circle back to this exact thought. But let's place it in view right now. You've given it to me this weekend. There are, we had it this morning on the tip of our tongues, right? The Existentialism 101 is everybody gets a world, but they're not entitled to anyone else necessarily agreeing. But then what about those monolithic, fascistic, technologically enabled creatures of power who insist their worlds upon others? That's the nutshell, right? So that's Soriau's nutshell, it turns out. Like, what if someone experiences, like, I don't get to have my reality because there's just this monolith coming after me, informational, and also so Dickian. This is fundamentally a description of reality as a projection, a field of projection, a network, a vast active living intelligence, but not of a monolithic or centralized reality of the endless plurality of worlds. Okay, this can also remind us of Deleuze, and I'm going to take a tiny detour to Deleuze, because when you hear the word dispossessed, we think of deterritorialization, right? The key term in Deleuze's political philosophy is the idea that some artists, some people, some nations, some races have been deterritorialized. And he talks about this in terms of art, and I think it's very recognizable in terms of art, that like the writers who express deterritorialization are the writers who come to us, like Kafka is the emblem. A Jewish, Czechoslovakian Jew writing in High German, he doesn't have his territory. He's working from under the floorboards by definition. He's a cockroach. Okay? So the deterritorialized artist can speak to us eloquently of the situation of deterritorialized peoples. Okay, so now La Pujade begins to talk about Philip K. Dick directly. He defines Dick in terms of Soriau's philosophy like this. He says the worlds that Dick constructs are always on the point of collapsing precisely because they are worlds whose appearances are determined by a clash of multiple minds vying for control. We all recognize this. I have no hard heavy lifting to do right now. I can just say Eye in the Sky, Three Stigmata, Palmer Eldritch. We have this in our bodies, so I'm not going to spend any time on that. We totally recognize it. this situation is described in Dick in terms that are increasingly, as he ages, theological, philosophical, ontological. And they're also often spoken of in terms that are psychiatric. The way he describes this situation, he searches for a description that is satisfying to him, and he moves through a lot of psychiatric definitions, real focus on things like schizophrenia, to theology, philosophy, ontology. But I want to move it back. I want to re-territorialize Dick to 1950s and 1960s science fiction and remind us that one of the baseline conditions before he gets so esoteric in his description of multiple worlds vying to exist and the risk of an oppressor, a Palmer Eldritch, or Ferris Fremont, dominated and trying to unify it in a horrible way. Before he gets into those esoteric terms, he often describes it in terms that are typical of the 1950s galaxy writers. Robert Sheckley, Alfred Bester, Damon Knight, and their most important precursor, Frederick Pohl and Cyril Kornbluth. Okay? That's to say, Dick's first language for what he intuits about all of this stuff is derived from the pulp science fiction writers that gave him the lexicon for his work, and that is to say it's related to the mid-century explosion of advertising, public relations, television, the new service-based economy, the world of technocratic bureaucracy, and all the apprehensions that come about surveillance and control and the dread of conformity. Okay? So he works with these basic motifs that were part of the language of science fiction at that time. The new technologies, the new media, and the new inventions of professions like public relations or advertising, the ants men, these are going to create a form of monster, a monolithic amweb of consensus reality that's going to be as bad as the Holy Roman Empire. Now, he doesn't have that term yet, but he's really seeing it as a monster in formation, okay? But it's really to do with publicity and advertising in many ways, and those are all his first satirical targets. And broadcasting is so central, even before, decades before he's thinking about the pink beam is a kind of radio wave. He's already obsessed with radio, with transmission, broadcasting, DJs, So this importance of publicity, advertising, and broadcasting is in its potential simultaneously to dominate, but also for the sneaky voice to come through, the Walt Dangerfield to break into the signal and tell you the real, true, straight facts, okay? So, as is typical of Dick, it's an elusive value. It can be really positive, broadcasting, transmission. It could be the right signal telling you to stop listening to the rest, or it could just be part of the world that's fooling you, okay? Mostly, obviously, publicity, advertising, and broadcasting are shoring up the consensus reality and attempting to blot out alternative or destabilizing voices, but occasionally the destabilizing counter voice, the minority report, breaks through. Rival broadcasts are a fundamental notion, and we can begin to see it as organizing a lot of the plot descriptions. Jory is jamming the signal and dominating the signal in Eugen. Palmer Eldritch is obviously a monstrous blotting signal. He's whatever that company is that swept up all the radio stations, made them all stupid and the same.
Clear Channel.
He's a Clear Channel, right? Hoppy, when he wants to take over Marin County, he knows he has to usurp Walt Dangerfield's signal. So it's rival transmission, rival broadcast. Now this is another aside that will just provide some pleasure. This is one reason why They Live is such a satisfyingly Dickian text. is because it literalizes and makes you actually feel the pleasure of seeing the underground signal break through the monolithic hegemonic transmission that is determining reality. You see that guy jam into the broadcast on the television and tell you the truth for 2 urgent minutes, and then he goes away again, and everyone's got a headache and everyone's confused because the truth hurts. Right? Okay. So, this is my attempt to keep resituating. You know, it's so tempting to think about where Dick ends up in terms of his master metaphors or his master descriptions, but I want to keep resituating in the 50s and early 60s, if I can. So, before we go to the Black Iron Prison, let's remember that there are images of the world as a prison all through his work, much earlier, and that this is a fundamental metaphor also, you know, a problematic one, a confusing one, but for the experience of, you know, triumphal capitalism, right? It's a kind of prison of pleasure. But it's also a prison of distraction. I want to tell you a story about a real prison, and that's San Quentin. In the 1950s in San Quentin, there was a weird proliferation of writing. The prison library was very active, lots of people were sending books in, and people began writing, and there emerged 4 or 5 active incarcerated novelists at San Quentin at the same time. The most famous of them was a guy named Malcolm Brawley, whose book I very much commend to you, called On the Yard. And he wrote 4 or 5 novels in San Quentin, but there were others, and there was even a joke that used to circulate that San Quentin was the prisoner's Yaddo. And there are anecdotes about guys catching the sense of this and writing manuscripts and going to visiting time when they knew somebody was meeting up with their agent or editor to try to crash their manuscript over, you know, like it's visiting time, but I know he's going to meet his editor, I'm going to like hand off my manuscript. The warden of San Quentin got into a panic because there was so much description of the inside of this prison going out into the culture. And this was something they wanted desperately to shut down. Well, how did they shut it down? One guess.
They banned it.
No, they didn't ban it.
They closed the library.
They didn't close the library. They put televisions in all the public spaces that you couldn't turn off.
Bastards. Oh, that's nasty.
Finito, completo. Okay? They ran the signal. Transmission.
Don't have to close the library.
So much for the prisoner's Yaddo. Now, if you're a New Yorker who grew up the way I did, on a subway train for an hour every day where every single person on the train was in a book, or if it wasn't a book, it was a newspaper, folding it back, aggravating the text. And you go, where's my phone? And you go on the subway now. The New York City subway used to be the working man's Yaddo. Now it's the Black Iron Prison of distraction. No one will ever look at a book on the subway ever again because they put Wi-Fi in the subway tunnels at great expense. Okay. So, again, I want to...
What even is that?
Speedway?
No drag racing?
They've got their own reality. We're going to grant it to them. So, now I'm going to pivot to the image of the colony, away from prisons for a moment, to the idea of the colony in Philip K. Dick. And if you really think about it, it's a very major term in 21st century politics. Colonialization, decolonialization. Philip K. Dick was way out ahead of colonialization and its discontents. The place where his intuition makes the most amazingly acute joke about it is in The Unteleported Man, where he changes the name of newfound land to new colonized land. Effortless. He blows a hole in your thinking about the entire European migration to the Americas. Okay. And of course, we encounter colonial wholesale, it's there. It's also in the background of many other texts like Androids and the Simulacra. I want to actually focus on one of the awkward texts in the PKD canon, The Unteleported Man, or, you know, as it's known, I think really I like the old title. Lies Incorporated. What a mess. But also, the original novella, in its essence, a very, very naked, candid confrontation, one he couldn't solve, puzzle he couldn't solve, with the crisis. And I think there's an idea about it, which I'm going to offer up to the biographer, or the many biographers here. I think The Unteleported Man is a response text, and I'm going to give you the reveal in a moment to what I think it's a response to. But let's just remember it for a moment, because it's a minor work, or one people have been told don't bother with it sometimes. Rachmael ben Applebaum, one of the most Jewish names that Dick ever conceived, is very nervous because this magical, wonderful land far off, where people are being teleported to, this planet where everyone's happy, and the only thing you get back are very, very warm and fuzzy videos of how happy they are in new colonized land. It's too easy. And he doesn't believe it, and he doesn't trust the teleportation device, and he's going to go solo in a rocket ship. I think it's going to take him 18 years to find out whether that's a faked transmission from new colonized land. Okay? Because, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you the spoiler, because he suspects, and he's right, that it's not a happy place. It's a concentration camp. And in the original novella, that's basically the takeaway. It's very simple. It's a concentration camp. Now, this raises a really, so people are being tricked off Earth, right? It's a very basic idea. Being tricked off Earth, go colonize here, and then we're wiping our hands and go through this device. Lurking in the close background of this image is a story that he doesn't quite let himself write, which is one where the teleportation device itself is just a death machine. Because we have a double meaning by that time for concentration camp. We know it's also a death machine. Right? Why even send them to another planet? If you don't give a shit about them, you want them just off Earth, why not kill them with the fake teleportation? And you're willing to make fake videos of them. You really don't need the other planet at all, right? But Dick doesn't quite dare himself to do that story. It's just there as a subliminal vibe in this piece.
Stephen King did it.
Well, Cyril Kornbluth did. The Marching Morons
Oh, yes.
is a story about tricking the morons off Earth, where they are literally sent off to die under guise of a magical, wonderful destination. It's a total eugenics genocide story. Deeply uncomfortable story to read right now. But I'm going to talk about it a little bit and its place in the pantheon, because it was an immensely important story in science fiction precisely at the moment that Dick was starting out. It was seen as an emblematic deepening of the social satirical capacity of the genre. So let me just build a really quick sketch. Now this depends, does anyone know this book, Rationalizing Genius by John Huntington? One of the best books of science fiction criticism I've ever read. And very formative for me because I read it early on. I think it was written in the 80s. I don't know if he stayed in the field. He's an English professor, I think he's alive. But basically, he looked at the stories that were the canonical stories in the field in 1970. He looked at the stories in something called the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. And he wanted to see what story they told about technocratic idealism. And he says, there's a before and an after. There's the idealization of of engineers will solve all our problems and they will take us to space and everything's going to be great. The familiar Heinlein vibe, right? Like everything will be solved by technocratic, egalitarian, idealistic notions. And this was what science fiction was for. This is what Hugo Gernsback and John W. Campbell wanted it to be for, right? And then it comes to a crisis point, and the crisis point is in the new us and them of some of us are smart, some of us are maybe not so smart. Maybe some of us are geniuses, maybe some of us are slam, maybe some of us are super normals. And then the immediate problem for anyone who's thinking is, what the fuck do we do with the rest of it? Right? And that's the Marching Morons. That's the story Kornbluth was dark enough and fucked up enough to write. And the companion story to it, in a way, the dumb story that's also brilliant, that is the end game of the technocratic idealistic thought experiment is a story called The Cold Equations by Tom Godwin, where it's proved that you must throw the girl off the spaceship because it's more important to get the medicine there than to save this, poor sweet girl's life. Because the equations tell you that that's the situation. If you follow the cold equations to their limit, it's also right to send the morons off to die. These are, in the case of Cyril Kornbluth and Frederick Pohl, these are stories written specifically by disappointed party communists, guys who in the 20s and 30s believed that we were all the workers who were going to rise up and transform everything. And they're disappointed in the masses in a very definite way. And they're starting to be ready for, fuck the masses. They don't get it. They get what they deserve. We're smarter. And Kornbluth writes this story. But it really brings about, without anyone being conscious of it, brings out the end of the Heinlein balancing act where it's all going to work out. It's actually a catastrophe of a new elite, a new aristocracy, a technocratic aristocracy, who are not fundamentally democratic. Well, welcome to Silicon Valley. Right? And what are they doing with the marching morons? They're creating the subway, they're creating San Quentin in your house, in your mind, every day, and you're just marching off to indolence and distraction, right? Total success, except that our physical bodies are not disposed of. Okay. This is Donna Haraway. Someone quoted her today brilliantly. There are political consequences to scientific views of the world. So, in Hunting to the Scheme, he basically says science fiction thinks that it was one thing until the new wave, and then it got really weird and literary and dark and morbid. He says actually the changeover happened in the early 50s when the technocratic idealism exposed its paradoxes and flaws, and you started to get the satirical writers like Pohl and Kornbluth and Sheckley, who were writing negative stories about technology and dire stories about the implications of science fictional and scientific worldview. And Dick arises from that moment. That's what's so confusing. It's why histories of the field that keep wanting to have a pivot with the Samuel Delaney, Thomas Dish generation are confusing because they got fancy, they got queer, they got complicated, they got sexy. But the change to darkness happened 15 or 20 years earlier with Dick and Sheckley and these guys who were refuting the idealisms of the Heinlein, John W. Campbell world. Okay, there's my pocket history of science fiction for you. Still with me? Everybody's good?
Oh yeah.
So this problem of the genius, the killer child, the evolutionary leap who's either great because it's me or a nightmare, this obsesses science fiction in the 50s. You have not Tom Godwin, this guy who wrote that one story, Jerome Bixby, It's a Wonderful Life, where the genius child torments everyone with what? A dominant paradigm, a transmission that no one can get out of, right?
It's good that Bart did that.
Right.
Episode.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So either the genius evolutionary leap child is either a really bad situation, or it's me and us. We're slan. We're more than human. They don't understand us, but we see it all. Okay? Dick also engages with this image. Jory is It's a Wonderful Life. Right? Manfred Steiner is a really broken slan. He knows everything. If only we can make contact with this beautiful visionary. Right? Okay. That's very much about this problem of the genius. And that's what Huntington's book, Rationalizing Genius, really makes you see, is that this idea that, it's creepy because it's like a eugenics idea. We always knew that slan were a problem, right? Well, it's a eugenicist fantasy, Darwinian fantasy, that we are like we are at our science fiction convention where no one understands how brilliant how right we all get it every day. Because in our daily lives, we're, most science fiction fans and many of the writers, not all, but many of the writers were from blue-collar families. They were these disappointed communists, or they were, working people, or ex-soldiers. Kornbluth himself part of the reason I think he was as dark as he was he was a traumatized World War II veteran. He fought, I think, at the Battle of the Bulge. He was in the ship, and it basically killed him. He neglected his health and was, he was never going to live long, and so he brings forth the darkness that the science fiction world was not handling, and even Dick wasn't, as I said, because he's still got this fantasy that, oh, we're going to go and fix up that concentration camp on another planet. He puts a happy ending on Unteleported Man. The morons die. Okay, so Dick actually, intuitively, and almost immediately resolves the tension in the technocratic ideal in a very interesting way. He breaks the image of the technological person who has a relationship to machines into two pieces. There is the capitalist engineer developer who's bad, the hegemonic overdog who dominates by means of technology, but there's also the repairman, the tire regroover. It's a way out of the nightmare that has emerged all of a sudden, that to be a technocratic might actually be to be a fascist. Well, yeah, it might be. You might be Elon Musk, but you might also be one of these guys working in the back of the radio shop who he adored. Okay, so this guy, the regroover, he patches together a working model of reality on a daily basis, like a living can of Ubik, like Instauration. He's the living embodiment of Instauration. He makes worlds, and when Dick explores him to his fullest, you get characters like Stuart McConchie, who makes little beings. He instaurates little beings, and they trail around him, and they're alive. Or you get what's his name, the geek android, distaff android maker in
Isidore, Jack Isidore. Yeah.
You get Jack Isidore. You get these instaurating super tinkerers who make life on a tiny basis. They make little worlds. They instaurate here and there other little cool things and beings and worlds and possibilities that are never going to try to dominate. Those things will never take over. They'll never become Elon Musk. Okay? There's a French word for this exalted ideal, the bricoleur. Hunter makes things out of other things often. And again, instauration is this great combination of repairing but also creating. Things only exist because you repair them. Somehow almost repair becomes like a preceding term for existence. I need something to repair, and now there's a thing. Like I'm going to just stick this cart and this broken thing together, and oh look, there it goes. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about Unteleported Man versus Marching Morons. Can you go there with me? Okay. So if it's a rewrite of Marching Morons from the point of view of a suspicious moron, basically, you've got Dick's basic move, in a nutshell again, identify with a loser. He reads this paradigmatic story and he's like, what if I was one of those guys? I think I might be. I don't want to get into television. Slavoj Žižek has this wonderful joke that he tells about Soviet prison camps. I mean, I guess it's a Soviet joke, where Žižek says that the guy is sentenced to a prison camp that he's promised is actually a work camp, and it's blissful and it's a really nice place to go. I mean, it's not a prison camp. It's a forced colonization of Siberia, whatever they would call that, a kind of a work program. And the guy is sentenced to this work program, but he's told, you will be happy there because everyone there is happy. He's shown pictures and descriptions, and like there are lots of women there, and the food is actually really good. There's very fulfilling work. Don't worry. But the guy's suspicious, just like Dick's character in The Unteleported Man. And the guy says to his friend, I'm going to write you letters from this place. Oh, and that's the other thing. You'll be fully allowed to communicate with your family and friends. It's all going to be great. The guy says, I'm a little worried. I'm going to write you letters and tell you what's going on, but of course they will censor the letters. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll be forced to write letters. If I'm right, I'm going to be forced to write letters saying everything's fantastic. But if I use red ink, everything that I say is the exact opposite of what I say. Great plan. So the guy goes, and the friend finally gets, months pass, and the guy gets a letter. He says, sorry it's taken me so long to write. This is the wonderland you can only dream of. I've been to bed with several gorgeous women, and I have the most remarkable, fulfilling career. The food is good. We have theater here, and the nature, the closeness to the sky and the trees and the forest it's so enlivening. I feel healthy. I feel better than I've ever felt. We have everything we could possibly wish for. There's only one thing lacking in this paradise. We do not have any red ink. So, in a way, this also captures that elusive, indescribable quality that you feel Dick pursuing in his descriptions of what's wrong with the world. I can't find the red ink, right? I can't write in the only language that would actually transmit the truth. I have to surround it with all these other implications or metaphors. Okay, again, I'm going to make short work. This nightmare, the imposition of a single reality through technological, ideological means, Nixon, Ferris Fremont, we all know this. Molinari, the replication is part of the horror of it. What if there's spare copies of Trump, on other planets? What if what if Trump is a Yancey and they just keep programming him? He'll never die. His hair just gets a little worse. It's the horror is that these things roll out the claim that they are a single world, an enclosed and self-referential.
Yeah.
Here's Dick. Life in Anaheim was a commercial for itself, endlessly replayed. Nothing changed. It just spread out farther and farther in the form of neon ooze. The transmission is monolithic. No other transmission can break through. Dick is also interested, and this is, I think, an aside that's worth taking a moment over. He's also interested in the participant glamorous dupe. Jason Taverner is not himself the originator of the transmission. He's just a six who's like riding the wave. Okay? This is an interesting character because he's oblivious in a marvelous way because he's both taking in the monolithic lie, the transmission that everything's great, and producing it. He's being used to help produce it with his glamorous television show. He's emitting the signal and he's drunk on it. Okay? So that's another really particular possibility that's worth noticing. And I'm going to read to you just a couple of lines from page 5 of Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. Jason and Heather, the two sixes, are done with their show and they're talking about how much they despise their fans. You don't like them, Jason said, because you don't like yourself. You secretly think they have bad taste. They're dumb, Heather grunted. They're ordinaries, Jason said. Heather grated. Don't say that word. They're ordinaries, he said again. And they're morons. There it is. Handling the morons. Now, Taverner is a fantastical, this book is a remarkable tableau of what happens when the rupture comes, the transmission, the signal is broken, as in they live. He's not famous anymore. He suddenly sees. He sees the prison camp, universities, he sees racism, all of the things that he can't see while he's engaged in the transmission become visible to him. And he's feeling very sorry for himself. He's playing a tiny violin, but the book is a relentless cascade of the realities that the transmission has held at bay until that moment. He becomes an exemplary case of the white man who's forced to live in the actual reality. In a way, it's like that Trading Places movie. Right? The star is taken offline. Okay. The drug in Flow My Tears specifically is described as in Faith of Our Fathers. The drug, KR9, it breaks down the binding that keeps us from seeing concurrent universes. Not one other bad universe, but concurrent universes. Okay, again, reality is not this one other stable place that when you peel away the monolithic fake transmission, you see one solid, okay, there it is. Now I've got my reality. You see the overwhelming concurrence of multiple infinite possibilities. You have to live in it. And sometimes it hurts too much to live in it. Quote from the book, "For the user, it abolishes the distinction between existing and not existing." That's what this drug does. That sounds like Sorial right there, right? In other words, the illusion is always of a single reality. The revealed reality is always multiple or infinite. We've been working on this all weekend. Okay. Sometimes Dick wrote this as a horror story, as in Faith of Our Fathers. It's unbearable. It's Lovecraft. It's a nightmare. You don't want to go back on the drug as quick as possible. But it wasn't always a nightmare. Okay, hold that thought. Here's Lapujade in the book about Philip K. Dick writing about the colonizer. The colonizer isn't just the person who appropriates the land and its inhabitants. He also imposes a new reality. Okay? Like missionaries imposing their God on populations of heretics. Though in Dick, the means of this are always technological or pharmacological. Okay. So in the case of Israel, we could see an enormous ideological machine that was necessary for the erasure of the fact of the Nakba. And I'm going to quote Moshe Dayan. This is verbatim. "Jewish villages were built in the place of Arab villages. You do not even know the names of these Arab villages, and I do not blame you, because geography books no longer exist. Not only do the books not exist, the Arab villages are not there either. Nalal arose in the place of Malul, Kibbutz Gvat in the place of Jibta, Kibbutz Sarid in the place of Hunefis. There is not one single place built in this country that did not have a former Arab population." Okay, back to my basic idea. PKD is a meaningful political philosopher. To be a meaningful political philosopher, actually, there's a very baseline requirement, which is you have to have a utopian vision. Now, we don't usually think of Dick as a utopian writer. But if he is any kind of political philosopher, or if his work can be seen, we don't mean Dick, that guy with all his crazy day-to-day changes, but if his work equals political philosophy, it must present a utopian premise, however thin, however tiny the margin. That would, of course, be, if he has a utopian vision, it would be the one that he and Sorial both describe, a world of absolute instability, of rival realities, none of which contain sufficient reality to be totally persuasive, and all of which require constant instauration or repair. But it goes on. It tolerates, side by side. Lapujade is a sentence from Lapujade. "In Dick, the world must be continuously produced." Okay, Andrew, today you said, if nothing is real, how do we treat other people? So, let's turn to two other novels from the 60s. One you'll expect me to turn to, I've already mentioned it, Dr. Bloodlet. I hardly have to linger on this for long. It is his utopian vision. And like a lot of science fiction writers, he has felt forced to destroy the world in order to produce anything like a utopian vision. But unlike most of the writers in science fiction history who destroy the world in order to get to a utopia, he does not go back to a pastoral, pre-technological fantasy. It's almost uniformly the case that when, and we all recognize this happens over and over again. Even very sophisticated and lovely books, fascinating books, evocative books, beautifully written books if they're by Englishmen, destroy the world in science fiction to produce a pastoral reversion. Dick does not do that in Bloodletting. What do you get? It's a utopian amalgamation of pastoral and cosmopolitan diversity, mutated animals, human-machine hybrids, rehabbed machines that have gained some kind of animation. The unbodied are allowed in this utopia. Even the dead get to play along. They're all okay. Multiple worlds, all instaurated by their various participants and accepted and, for the most part, except for Bluthgeld, embraced, tolerated in concurrence. That's Dick's utopian vision. And really, it's not that different from the world he destroys. It's Berkeley. It's that repair shop where both a black guy in the 50s and a kind of a freak in Hoppy are allowed to be part of the repair crew. You know, and you can go out for a burger and you can go to the music shop and there's culture and there's diversity and everyone's just instaurating what they care to because it's Berkeley, it's Freak Town, it's Berserkly. He doesn't take you to a pastoral fantasy. He takes you to a cosmopolitan view. Okay? Now, these things are unstable, as Sorial warns us. Very, very precarious. And only one person trying to dominate that reality can fuck it up really badly. It's fundamentally, as I said, a struggle to control the broadcast. Hoppy wants to take over Dangerfield's radio signal. The interesting thing about that book's solution is that the usurpation that's threatened is defeated by a usurpation. The Bill, the unborn twin, takes over Hoppy. This is a very Dickian moment where values are so unstable that usurpation might be the cure for usurpation, right? Like that's how thin a wire we walk. But Bill's version is not as totalitarian as Hoppy's. So, you know, one moron has to die. Or a couple of them do. But they're totalitarian morons. They're not the idiot rabble. They're people who fancy themselves to be, you know, slam. They're going to rule. So, it's an anarchist vision. You got to kill the leader, or the person who potentially has that dream. And you know, and by solving the problem, Bill embodies himself, and he's super powerful. He has access to the world of the dead, but he's not a Jory by temperament. Okay, so usurpation is very interesting here because it's taking on both a negative and a positive value in the finale of the book. The tolerant coexistence of the groups here is the reproduction of a cosmopolitan mongrel utopianism. Like I said, it's Berkeley. Dylan. Bob Dylan. I'll let you be in my dream if I can be in yours. Okay, the other book that I'm going to place in this utopian context may be more surprising. Clans of the Alphane Moon. This is a very antic and nerve-wracked book, right? But it presents a really strange vision of a cooperative coexistence of disparate groups. Although it's so hostile, so anxious, and so bizarre and satirical that we may not recognize it as such. The Pairs, the Depths, the Manics, the Hebes, the Schitzes and Polys. This is a tolerance for continuously negotiated, multiplicitous form of concurrent existences. The different modes of existence, all on one planet. Somehow they're making it work. And in fact, a totalitarian ship is launched. The CIA is going to come and try to turn them all back into a hospital. And so they band together to resist this proposed reversion to, you know, a moron state, essentially. It's neurodivergence, of course, before the word neurodivergence existed. They are autonomous but interlocking societies that spring from difference. Notably, at the end of the novel, Chuck Rittersdorf starts a new clan on the moon called the Norms. But it's only one among many. It has a population of one to begin. And he just leaves the door open. He thinks, maybe I'll get a few more people who decide to be norms. Now, this is great in two different ways. One, it's just like a very small minority population. But also, it reminds you that there's a possibility of transference. You might spend half of your life as a Skitz and then be like, you know what, I think actually I'm a Hebe. I'm going over there. Or you know, I was a depressed depressive for a while, but I'm going to be a manic now. Like people who like their dads come out when they're 50 or 60, you know, they're off to college and their dads switch polarities. This is a heterogeneous world where, you know, maybe most people stick with their identities, but switching also happens. The characters in the book audition themselves and one another as possibly misdiagnosed at times. However scrappy and argumentative, Clans is a utopian novel that rehearses the existence of existential plurality. That's Sorial's term. Existential plurality. Many existences. All of them provisional, requiring instauration. Okay, I'm almost done. You good?
Mm-hmm.
Not too much. Is thunder gonna get us? Okay.
We'll see.
I counted the seconds. It sounds like it was about 10 miles away.
Okay. I'm less than 10 miles from here.
I was thinking about it.
So, count that one.
It's a great sound effect.
Yeah, better than the
speedball.
I like how right when you said Dick's a utopian writer, it went.
Okay, so the last real jaunt I'm going to go on is to say, Martian time slip. You probably thought, why isn't he talking about Martian time slip more? I want to use it as the takeaway, and I'm going to say, again, having nothing to do with biographical speculations or possibilities, I'm going to say Martian time slip is an amazing magic tuning fork for thinking about what we're dealing with in arguments on the internet about imagery and terms and situations generating out of Palestine. Okay? One of the key things about Martian time slip, very elusive and crucial thing, is that the bleak men are not aliens. They're nomadic, dehumanized presences relegated in some unquestioned way to the past, like a living residue of past civilization. They're much more like Native Americans or African Americans. They're actually existing humans treated as if they are indigenous history, yet somehow still alive. Huntington, the guy who wrote that book I was recommending to you, writes about this. He says, in popular science fiction, imagining the alien usually consists of excluding it from the narrator's sense of what's normal and human. Even if it's positive, it's fundamentally divided from the human. But there is literature in which being alien to the author develops in complex ways because their alienness is not essential and defining. And then the comparison he offers is E.M. Forster's Passage to India, where the English absolutely fail to identify with the subcontinental Indians in their space, but they are full developed human characters, and that tension, I think, is actually very similar to the tension that Dick is generating with the bleak men here. This is the introduction of the indigenous conscience, and of course we recognize Dick's urge to do this, however awkwardly, also from things like David Montano, the time-traveling Cherokee, and those enigmatic Neanderthals who get unleashed in the simulacrum. Again, now it's Frederick Jameson, actually, who reminds us of the thing that Lacroixade got us part of the way to. There are always two stages to U.S. colonization. First, conquer the natives, then impose a fake American way of life on the colony. You know, when you watch Westerns, really good Westerns, like John Ford's Westerns, one of the things that you're always surprised at are the Scandinavian accents. And also the presence, usually, of different kinds of Indians in the space, hostile ones and friendly ones. There's a kind of, even with all the racism that's inherent in that form, there's a presentation of a moment when there was no consensus U.S. reality. There were different kinds of experiments and propositions, different realities coexisting. And they were spatially scattered. If you didn't like it here, you could kind of go over there. And you could maintain elements of the old country or whatever your value system was. But the second and most essential piece of colonization is to create a web, is to generate the broadcast that makes it all one thing. Well, that's the problem in Martian Time Slip. They're in an early Western. There's the Israelis over here, there's the bleak men doing this. People are sort of, it's it's dicky and it's kind of decayed and strange and uncomfortable, but they are, it's less comic than Planets of the Alpha Moon, but they are coexisting. There are multiple realities coexisting, and then, of course, Leo Bolin wants to come and build the emblem, and it's the death signal of American reality coming to transmit a unifying, monolithic signal that will completely, it will render the bleak men either, dead, or fundamentally they'll be put on reservations. They won't be interpenetrating with the space, and there won't be these variations in the way the colonists are functioning. And then, of course, you have the genius child, Manfred Steiner, who is autistically, thrust into the schizophrenic, timeless space where he sees the death world coming. He sees that that what's coming in the form of this, curmudgeonly, in some ways, almost recognizable, grandfatherly capitalist, is actually a hospital of bodies on machines, total dust world, death for everyone. The status quo is not okay, and we can't have Earth come and make that happen here. And I think for me, rereading this book, the most underrated great character, most meaningful character in Dick's work, at least in my recent revisiting, is Jack Bolin, who is strung between his own father and this imperative, and his own quite, selfish desires and conformist ideas about reality, and his sensitivity, his participation in the schizophrenic, nightmare, dream, visionary world of the child who's saying, it's hell coming for us. It's the death world. And it's an extraordinary balancing act that Dick creates in this character, where you feel that Bolin sees both realities, and he's strung totally between them. I'm going to make fast work of this. I feel the rain's coming. Jack Bolin is us. And in my symbolic allegory for you, Manfred Steiner is a protesting 18-year-old in an encampment on campus, who's sending us a message that sounds a lot like gubbish. It freaks us the fuck out. We don't want to hear that message. But they are actually attuned to the daily wavelength of signal from the world of gubbish, and that is those pictures and ideas circulating that we don't want to think about, and the future, the extrapolation that goes nowhere, because they know what we can't. We've lived in this normal reality where, somehow a democracy in the Middle East is a really good idea, and we're just going to kind of tough it out and pretend not to notice how, it's getting messy. It's not viable. There's only a death world. Doesn't mean they have the answers, but they see the death world coming. And in fact, they see that it's already here because time has collapsed. And they're trying to tell us it's not okay. We can't go over there and build Amwell. It's just actually not going to be okay. It's a horrible fact. So we are all Jack Bolin in Martian time slip right now. It's not pleasant to have access to to Manfred's signal. It's much to be resisted. On my own Instagram stream, I scroll as fast as I can past those pictures, and I try not to know, but I know. And the thing is, the only Instagram feeds I follow that are constantly saying, help, help, spread the word, Instagram took down my picture, are the ones with pictures of Gaza. In other words, they are the signal jammers like in They Live. They're trying to break into the signal, and they are being openly suppressed. In other words, Instagram, the internet, the freedom to do anything you want, the fake freedom, where everything is okay except the message from outside the signal. Okay?